Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition in the webcast series for Microsoft Dynamics for Retail R3. This session will focus on mass deployment of retail components using System Center Configuration Manager 2012 R2. Let's first look at the disclaimer here. The demo and/or any references to the product that you see in this video are pre-release products, and they may change until they are formally released as part of general availability. Let's look at the agenda for what we'll cover in this webcast. We'll look at the scope and coverage of the mass deployment feature using System Center Configuration Manager. We'll walk through the high-level workflow, the key steps and use cases involved in mass deployment, and then we'll look at the typical sequence of deployment. And finally, we'll spend some time looking at mass deployment of software updates and mass deployment of customizations. Let's first start by looking at a very brief introduction of this entire feature area. As I mentioned before, this feature area relies heavily on System Center Configuration Manager 2012 SP1 as well as 2012 R2. In this demo, I'll be using 2012 R2 for my demos. The idea of this feature area is to enable large-scale deployment of retail components in a more manageable fashion. In addition to that, the work that we've done in this feature area enables management as well as a streamlined means of not just deploying, but also managing the computers on which you would be deploying your retail components. In addition to that, we've also done work in mass deployment of software updates for retail components, as well as for mass deployment of software customizations for retail components. So what components are really covered as part of this feature area? Falls into four key buckets. There's the point of sale. So there's the retail point of sale, that is the traditional desktop application. We are also able to deploy using System Center with the retail modern point of sale, which is the Windows 8 style application, running on x86 and 64-bit platforms. This feature area does not cover mass deployment of the modern point of sale application on the Windows RT edition of Windows. This is only for the x86 and 64-bit versions of Windows. Second bucket is the databases. So we have the retail channel database, which formerly used to be the retail store database and the online channel database. So that's now just the retail channel database. We're able to deploy that using the retail mass deployment feature area. We're also able to provision and deploy an offline DB for use with a retail point of sale system using this feature area. The other bucket is the commerce data exchange components, namely the async server and client, along with the real-time service. And finally, for retail server, we're able to mass deploy the retail server component using this feature. Key things that you will not see listed here are, like I mentioned earlier, modern point of sale application running on Windows RT, The second thing you'll not notice here is mass deployment of the online channel on SharePoint. And another thing you'll not notice here is the retail hardware station. Moving on, let's now look at the high-level workflow of what is really involved in mass deploying retail components using System Center Configuration Manager. In case you are already familiar with System Center Configuration Manager, or if you've used this before, many of the concepts discussed here may seem more intuitive to you. In case you haven't had prior experience using System Center Configuration Manager, that's okay too. Wherever it's relevant, I will try to briefly explain appropriate concepts to aid in the understanding of the broader concept in the context of mass deployment. So before I move on, let me just spend a couple of minutes for those folks who may not have much experience using System Center Configuration Manager to briefly explain how it helps us and what it does as part of this feature area. So System Center Configuration Manager is part of Microsoft System Center Suite, and in particular, the Configuration Manager product that we rely on for this feature area provides the ability to remotely install applications or execute scripts on a remote computer. How it works is, to put it simply, there is a server component and there is a client component. The client component runs on a target computer on which you want to install applications or execute scripts. And the server component sits in the head office or your data center from where you are actually initiating the mass deployment. So that's just the basic concept. Now, as part of using System Center, this feature area comes with a couple of components. So to explain how this feature area is laid out functionally, there is the System Center Configuration Manager server that will be required, the server and the agents installed already on the target computers. The second piece is a mass deployment toolkit that we've authored to facilitate the integration between Microsoft Dynamics AX and System Center Configuration Manager. And I'll explain and demo what that's used for and how it's used and what the benefits there are. There are a couple of other components as well associated with the mass deployment toolkit. So there are components that facilitate mass deployment of customizations and component which facilitates mass deployment of software updates. So these are the components we've authored. Then another piece of this feature area is our set of forms that we have also created in Microsoft Dynamics AX, which would typically be used on the HQ. Now, if we put this all together and look at the high-level workflow, the broad steps that would be involved would be, the first one is System Center Configuration Manager initialization. What that means is, once you have your System Center Configuration Manager server set up and installed, and you already have your agent running on a target computer, after that, you install our mass deployment toolkit on the same computer as you have the console of System Center Configuration Manager installed. Now, using our toolkit, you run a specific command which prepares System Center Configuration Manager to support all of the scenarios that would be required to support this feature area. Now, as part of initialization, once you run the command, it does things such as it creates what are called application entities in Configuration Manager. It creates specific task sequences. It creates specific packages. So in general, a large portion of the work which users may have had to otherwise do manually by themselves in Configuration Manager, we basically automated majority of that work. So a user would only need to run the single command called initialization, and it would prepare the configuration manager environment for that person to then deploy the retail components whichever they wish to. So this can be a huge time saver, and although it's not so it pretty much is a mandatory step in the sequence, and it also saves a lot of time, so there's no reason not to perform this step. The next piece of the high-level workflow would be for a solution architect or a system architect who would be planning the all-up topology for the retail deployment. What they would do is they would go into Microsoft Dynamics AX on the HQ side, and they would start to define the desired topology of how they would want the system to be implemented. So they could say things like, I would want to deploy to 3 stores with 2 registers each, and 1 channel database in each store, 1 async client in each store. I would like to have 2 instances of async server, and so on and so forth. So they would be able to define their entire topology in Microsoft Dynamics AX. And they would be able to define it in terms of components that are specific to the retail solution for Microsoft Dynamics AX. So it'll be a very intuitive experience there. Again, when I demo it, it will be quite clear how it works. So once they've defined their entire topology in Microsoft Dynamics AX, the next step would be to export this topology into an intermediary form. And to do that, in the R3 release, we again make use of the mass deployment toolkit, and we trigger an export of the topology that has been defined in Microsoft Dynamics AX. Now, this topology that is exported as a file, that file contains all of the information that any system would require to actually deploy and configure the entire system as you would need it to be. So this file containing the metadata of the entire blueprint, the entire topology of the system, is pretty self-contained and doesn't need any additional information to be provided. Once this topology file has been exported from Microsoft Dynamics AX, the next piece of the workflow would involve taking this topology file and again using the toolkit on the computer that is running System Center Configuration Manager. You would use the toolkit to import this file into System Center Configuration Manager and be able to transform that information into specific actionable pieces of content in System Center Configuration Manager on which then users could perform specific actions. So this is a very high level workflow, and once you can imagine once the topology information is in System Center Configuration Manager, and the user has provided a few additional pieces of configuration, and the user can go ahead and the user can basically schedule a deployment of the entire topology, and that is all they would need to do. And from there on, System Center Configuration Manager would consider the schedule of the deployment, the installation components, what components need to be installed on which computers, what credentials need to be used for which components to be installed, where to store the log files, and so on and so forth. And it would perform all those processes by itself over a period of time. So this was the high-level workflow. Now let's move on and look at more specific pieces, more granular pieces of how this process works. So as I had mentioned in a previous webcast, in case you saw the webcast about installation and deployment of retail components, you may have noticed I mentioned this component called the Mass Deployment Toolkit. So this component has been newly introduced in the R3 release and is part of standard setup. So the expectation here would be, in case your AX client and your configuration manager client are not on the same computer, in case they happen to be running on different computers, the recommendation would be that you install this toolkit on each of those two computers using the setup wizard. So once you have the toolkit installed on both of these computers, you first move to the computer on which you have the System Center Configuration Manager console installed. And what you do then is, as I explained earlier, you run a command to initialize the Configuration Manager console with all of your applications and task sequences and so on and so forth. So it's ready to be used. After that, the next step generally recommended in the sequence is, assuming that you already have computers discovered by System Center Configuration Manager, the idea would be that instead of having to recreate these computer entities, by computer entity I mean an entity that contains things like your computer name, your IP address, your workgroup domain name, any unique identifiers, and so on and so forth. So in case System Center Configuration Manager is already managing computers or is already in know of computers that are reporting to it for management, we've authored a command in our toolkit. What that allows us to do is it allows the user to run that command on the computer running Configuration Manager and be able to extract all of the computers that have been discovered by Configuration Manager. So once you extract the list of all the machines that have been discovered, you can open this list up. This is a CSV file, so you can open it up in Microsoft Excel. And once you have this information available in Microsoft Excel, you can then proceed to your forms in Microsoft Dynamics AX, where you can start defining the actual topology as you would like it to be. Now, as part of defining the topology, one of the forms relates to the actual computer entities on which you would want to deploy your desired retail component. So that form has support for Excel add-in functionality, if you're familiar with that concept from prior releases of Microsoft Dynamics AX. It's a similar pattern where you get the ability to mass update and mass enter new records for a form that supports that capability. So our form in Microsoft Dynamics AX, which corresponds to computer entities, does support an Excel add-in. So what that essentially lets you do is, since you have the computers exported in a CSV format, which you can open up as an Excel document, you can pretty much copy a large number of computers from the discovered inventory and directly add them using the Excel add-in. You can bulk add them into the AX forms. Now, I would like to point out a small caveat, and I'll show you once we move to the demo section, in that if you are running CTP4, there may be some glitches in how the Excel add-in copy-paste functionality works in this build. So be mindful that this piece of the functionality of being able to copy paste a large number of computers into the AX forms using the Excel add-in, you may run into certain issues. So that was the Excel add-in. You're able to copy computers and you bulk add them to Microsoft Dynamics AX. Another thing that we've added in this release is we've added a topology visualizer that lets you visually append or modify a retail topology. So instead of just having a blueprint in the means of forms, interrelated forms, we've added a visual component which helps depict these relationships in a more intuitive fashion. Another thing we do as part of the definition of the topology, and also as part of later onwards the export of that topology, is we perform some basic validations to ensure that the topology that the customer is defining is actually a valid topology. So once a customer is done defining a topology in Microsoft Dynamics AX, their next step would be to then export that topology using the mass deployment toolkit. So they'd run the mass deployment toolkit, and they would get the option to specify additional parameters for more granular export of the topology. So they may not want to export the entire topology, they may want to export only certain subsections of the topology. So the toolkit lets them do that as well. So once they've exported the topology, they then move on to the computer running the configuration manager client. They copy the file over, and they use the toolkit again to actually import that topology information into System Center Configuration Manager and be able to actually generate a topology that users can act upon. So what happens is, it may be relevant to mention here, is in the event that a user re-imports a topology into System Center Configuration Manager repeatedly, and assuming that the topologies differ to some extent from one import to another, the import itself is an incremental import, in that if you have added certain things to your topology and removed other things from the topology, we will preserve the commonalities, and we will only make delta changes to things that have actually changed, and not recreate everything in that topology. Another functionality that we support as part of the mass deployment toolkit is we let you delete an entire topology. This may be more relevant in non-production scenarios where you may end up creating a large number of these topologies, and you may want to clean up the older topologies here. Then next thing we look at is batch setting the log share location. So the idea here being, since you'll have presumably dozens of or a, a handful of different kinds of components on hundreds or maybe thousands of machines, it may be typically a little bit challenging to be able to uh, look for installation log files for each of those components on each of those computers and then follow up and see what happened. So what we've done is we've provided a means for a user at the time of importing the topology to define a default log location for that computer. And now this could ideally be a shared network drive, and this could be set at a batch level. So it doesn't have to be set just at leaf node or individual computer level. This could be set up at a higher level of the topology, which provides you with the capability of easily setting common parameters for a large number of computers. In a similar fashion, what you've done is you've provided the ability to batch set credentials used by different components, typically for running as a specific account. Typically, those components require you to provide credentials for running as those specific components. So the ability here being to say, I want to install this, for instance, async client instance, and I want this async client instance, Windows service, to run as a specific user account. So you are able to not only set the credentials at a component level, but you can also set these at a higher level in the topology, so it can be applied broadly to a larger number of instances of specific components. Another thing we're going to look at is the task sequences for the role manager. So under the covers, how our mass deployment system works is that as part of the initialization of configuration manager, we create this task sequence called the role manager. Now, what this task sequence does is, assuming that once you launch AX for the first time, you schedule this task sequence to say, hey, run this task sequence every 5 hours, every day, every 2 days, whatever suits your organization. And the sole purpose of this task sequence is to set the correct roles on each of the computers. What that means is, if you did initial import of your topology into System Center Configuration Manager, this task sequence, the role manager task sequence, will parse through that topology and it will determine, okay, on computer X, we need to install component A and component B. And on computer Y, we need to install component C and component D. So it essentially parses all the information, all the role-specific information that is contained in the topology. And what it does is, it goes to each physical computer, and for each physical computer, it defines the set of roles that are desired to be installed on that computer. So it could go to computer X, and on computer X, it could make or create a record saying computer X needs to have component A, B, and C installed on it. And that's all it does. Likewise, if somebody or if a user re-imports the topology at a later time and the topology includes fewer components than before. This role manager again does a similar thing, but in the inverse sense, in that it says, okay, now this computer only requires component B and C, doesn't require component D. So it go ahead and it would update the mark or the indicator for what components need to be actually installed. Now, aside from this indication of what components need to be installed, the next piece of the puzzle is the actual task sequences that a user would then run, and user would target a set or a subset of computers on which to run this task sequence. So, for instance, your task sequence, you could point to n number of computers in your topology, and you would say, which is quite useful. What you would be able to do now is you would say, I want to run this task sequence, which is designed to install and configure retail components. So in general, you don't need to again know which components you want to install, because we assume that majority of that information has already been defined by you when you're defining the topology in AX. So the idea being, we've tried to make it as simple as possible. So we have a primary task sequence which has install and configure retail components. In addition to this very broad task sequence, we have a few more task sequences which are somewhat correlated in this question, in this context. One of the other task sequences that we have is configure retail channel database. Another task sequence we have is around uninstallation. We have another task sequence around configuring of the offline database, or the provisioning of the offline database functionality. We also have a specific task sequence for actually uninstalling databases. So your standard uninstallation of components is not going to uninstall databases unless you specifically wanted to do so for a certain set or subset of databases. And then you schedule deployments. And scheduling deployments essentially means that you schedule the definition of what needs to be installed, and you schedule it against a given target collection, meaning a given set of computers, and you give it a time period to do that. So you can define recurrence schedules and so on and so forth. So that's what scheduling and deployment essentially means. And hopefully, in most use cases, the deployment scheduling should be the final step in the process of deploying a component using System Center. In addition to the happy path where things work easily, we've also put in considerable effort to make it easy to troubleshoot typical mass deployment issues and how we can resolve these in a timely fashion. So that was the more specific details around mass deployment. We can spend a couple of minutes to quickly look at the sequence involved in mass deployment of software updates. So the mass deployment of software updates makes use of this another component in System Center Configuration Manager called System Center Updates Publisher. So System Center Updates Publisher, or SCUP in short, is a companion application that works with System Center Configuration Manager. So to be able to mass deploy software updates, you would have to install this component. And then you would download your update packages from a standard location as before, from your customer source or partner source locations. Then what you do is you would use one of the other accompanying toolkits that we have along with the retail mass deployment toolkit. The other toolkit we have is a catalog generator toolkit. Now, what this toolkit does is something very nifty. This toolkit takes the uh, MSP from the update package that you originally had, and from reading the metadata from that MSP, it's able to automatically uh, fetch the information that is required for creating a quote catalog kind of file, which is used for software update deployment using SCUP as well as Configuration Manager. So once you're on that toolkit and you generate a catalog, then you launch Updates Publisher. You import the catalog into System Center Updates Publisher, and then you publish the software catalog via Windows Server Update Services all the way onto the Configuration Manager instance that you have running. And once this update becomes available in System Center Configuration Manager, then it's a matter of simply deploying the software update to a set or a subset of computers in your topology. And the best part of doing things this way is that since the original MSP already had a considerable, or at least had the basic information needed to make the distinction on to what existing components does this MSP correspond to. So things like what's the base product to which this MSP is applicable, and what does it mean to actually have this update installed, and what's the detection mechanism. So those kinds of pieces of information, the catalog generator toolkit actually extracts that information from the provided MSP, and it uses that information to facilitate creation of the catalog. So once you have the catalog in System Center Updates Publisher and you publish it over to a System Center Configuration Manager, and then you hit deploy on a subset or all of your topology, the software is now going to be pretty intelligent to automatically determine whether the update should be installed on computer A or computer B or computer C, because it now has the logic built in to be able to detect whether or not an update is already installed on a computer, and two, whether an update is applicable to a base software that is already installed on this computer. So that makes this experience a lot more streamlined in that it saves you from the trouble of having to define the rules on how this software update needs to be distributed. The other corresponding story that I'd like to touch on is how can you mass deploy software customizations for things like your channel database or for things like your retail point of sale. How we've addressed this story in the R3 release is actually quite similar, especially in the latter parts, of how we deploy software updates in a mass deployment fashion. So if you look at the steps here, initially you launch the retail SDK, you launch the or you open the customization deployment solution to create customizations for your retail POS and your channel DB. You open that in Visual Studio. Then you build out your customizations, whatever these need to be. You add these, add links to these customizations in the right locations, And after all said and done, you basically build the solution, and from which you get a customized package in the form of an exe file. Now, in case you didn't quite follow the specifics of how you would build a customization deployment, be sure to read the scenario scripts that go along with these videos, and you'll find more specific detail on how to actually use the customization deployment toolkit that we've authored and how best to make use of this thing. So that was software customization deployment. Once you have your exe file, then you use that exe file that you came from your build solution, and you create a SCUP catalog from this customized package. So from that point onwards, a customized package is treated in a similar fashion to any other update. And like other updates, you can install or you can roll back updates as you so please. So we'll next look at the actual product, and we'll do a walkthrough and we'll do a demo of some of the key capabilities. But for more specifics and more details, be sure to read up the documentation available on the Connect website, as well as the scenario walkthrough document, which includes the specific commands you need to run, specific steps you need to perform, and so on and so forth. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to take a look at the actual product. Okay, now we're looking at a computer on which I already have System Center Configuration Manager deployed along with the console. And in addition to that, I also have the retail mass deployment toolkit installed on this computer. And just as a quick recap, let me show you how we got that. This is the standard installer. I can run this. I select installation of new retail components. Next, and from here I select the installation, the mass deployment toolkit. So it's already been installed here, and there is no configuration required. You just walk to the wizard and it installs this. Now, once this is installed, the next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to go to the location where this is actually installed. So in my case, and in case you didn't change the standard install location of your setup support files, I would navigate to C, program files x86, Dynamics AX. That's the one. And in here, I would navigate to this folder, and I would launch PowerShell to actually run the toolkit as an administrator. And now we're ready to use the toolkit. So let me close this window because I already have another PowerShell window where I have been using this toolkit. And I open this one. So let me clear the screen and walk you through some of the common usage patterns here. And again, all of this has already been documented in the scenario walkthrough documents that you should also have access to. So you'll know exactly what command to use, how to use, and in any case, you can also use the help menu available here. So let me start with just an open-ended what commands are available for this toolkit. And it's going to tell me what things are available. So I can do things such as delete a retail topology. Seems I lost connectivity. So we'll be right back in a second. And we're back. So as you'll see, there are a number of different available commands available to you, and they are listed clearly along with the description of what these do. So things such as your create retail application is the command you'd run for initializing the system center configuration manager the first time. Export retail topology is the command you would run on the computer on which you had your AX console, so that would export the topology. Export machines would be the command that you would run on the configuration manager computer. So this would export your list of computers out as a CSV file. Then import topology would be the topology if you wanted to import this into a configuration manager and then take actions on this topology. Then likewise you have set credentials, set log share, and so forth. So as a simple example, let me demo one of the operations here for you. So what I'm going to do is I am going to give me 1 second. I'm going to run the export machines command on this computer. So let me go in here and I will say retail toolkit, and I would say -o, and I'll go and say export machines, and then I can do one of two things. I can either check to see what parameters are required, so I can just do -? It will tell me it needs to know the file name for the file in which it would actually create the machine. So I would run this command again, except now I'll pass in the file name, and I will put the file somewhere on one of the folders on my computer. Give me 1 second. And I will call the folder, that's what I'll call the file. And with that, I will export the files. So this file should now be ready. So we can take a look. And this is the file that was created here. So I can open this with Excel, and you'll see there are two computers that were discovered by System Center Configuration Manager, and their names, IP addresses, domain names, workgroup names, and so forth are all listed here, along with MAC addresses. And an interesting field you might want to look out for is a unique identifier that a configuration manager uses to identify a computer on which a configuration manager agent is already deployed. So this helps to uniquely identify a computer, even if computers may in some cases have the same name as well as the same workgroup name. Imagine you have two different workgroups in different parts of your organization, and they both have the same workgroup name, the same computer name. It can become ambiguous about which computer you're referring to. So in those cases, the unique identifier allocated by configuration manager comes in pretty handy. So at this point, you can copy multiple records, and now let's switch to the computer on which we have AX running. So I'm going to switch to the other computer now. So now we're on the other computer on which I have my AX client running, and in this case I also have my AOS and other AX components, but that doesn't really matter much. But my AX client is on this computer and my AOS is on this computer. So what I've done is the file in which I had the retail computers exported from, just give me 1 second. So we copied over the file with the machine's records, the CSV file, we copied it over to this computer, and we also have the toolkit installed on this computer along with AX. So what we've done is we can launch AX now, and I'll show you some of the forms which will need to be populated to actually define your topology here. So the forms which are related to this feature area are under retail mass deployment, and under retail mass deployment there is a menu item for the visualizer. There are menu items for each deployable component, and there are menu items and corresponding forms for computer entities and retail computer clusters. Now, the idea of using a computer entity is so you can, when defining your topology, clearly indicate that this component I want to have installed on this specific physical computer. So you may want to say this retail point of sale component I would like to have installed on computer A over here. So to do that, we need to ensure that we have the actual computers already defined in these forms. So as I'd mentioned earlier, these forms come with an Excel add-in capability for mass edits and updates. So one would simply have to click on the Excel add-in button here, and then it launches the Excel spreadsheet along with the Dynamics AX add-in enabled. So once you are in the spreadsheet, you could, for instance, add additional rows. You could manually type these in, use Excel formula to fill out computer names, or what's even better is you could launch the file where you exported all the discovered computers from Configuration Manager, and you would copy the records, and you would simply paste those records in here, after which you would hit publish, and the records would show up in AX once you refresh them. As of the CTP4 build, copy pasting records from the CSV file may give you certain errors, and you may not be able to do that. But if you manually type in records here and publish, that should work. So hopefully we'll have this issue resolved by the time we actually release the product and make it generally available. In any case, this should give you a good idea of how you can bulk export and import computers into Microsoft Dynamics AX. So moving on, so let's assume we now have 3 computer entities defined in Microsoft Dynamics AX here. And you'll notice if I open one of these, let's say I open this one, and I edit this, you'll notice that only the first 5 fields here are editable, and the rest of the fields are read-only, in that these are more informational fields which came in through the machine information import, which we did using the Excel add-in. So this thing lets you understand things like what's the OS name and version and so on and so forth. And now you have this computer entity that you can do other things with. So one of the things we do next is, since we have the target computers available, we go back to our deployment forms, and we can actually create computer cluster entities. So computer cluster entities are essentially just aggregations of computer entities, so that your components like your IIS web applications, you can target them to a group of computers instead of a single computer. So let's add a cluster here. So let me first create new and add a cluster. So we can say default cluster, and we can say this is the HQ cluster, and we add a couple of machines here. So we can pick one machine here and one machine here, and we say that's one of our clusters, and we can say backup. So all depending on how you define your topology and how you intend to use it. And you'll notice that I can actually pick one machine to be part of multiple clusters, and that's perfectly all right. So we've done that, and we have two cluster entities created. Then we can move through all the other deployment forms and define how exactly we want our topology to work. So for instance, our channel database deployment will let you define on what computers and how you want to deploy your retail channel database. So let's call it retail channel database, and you provided a reference to a channel database profile. We can pick any of these depending on how you wish to deploy your channel database, and you define the target computer on which you want to deploy this channel database. So in this case, we can pick any of these computers. We can pick this one, and you would then need to define the database server instance and the name of the database. So you can put in MS SQL server, or in case you're using a different instance, you mention that, and your database name. You can call this database name. That's what you can call this database. And this defines your intent of deploying a channel database using these parameters. And we'll close that. The next thing we can look at is, say, for instance, your async server deployment. And similar to how you would install this component using AX setup, you provide similar pieces of information in this deployment form. So you can say async server, you can pick a base URL, and you can pick other parameters and so on and so forth. So we can try that, and you pick the fields, so on and so forth. So you define these deployments for all of your components, and you'll realize that some of these fields are required, others are optional. And the idea being, we tried to get users to create valid legal topologies that actually work, so that if you, for instance, had a channel, or if you, for instance, were defining a deployment for an async client, we would pretty much ask you to provide a reference to a corresponding async server deployment and a channel database deployment, because those would be needed for an async client to function. So that phase, we've tried to reduce accidental errors in creating the records for your topology and prevent misconfigurations. So in any case, once you've defined all of this topology information here, and again, if you walk through the scenario document that comes along with this video, all of the forms, all of the fields are quite well documented, and also comes with sample values of what values you can put in there. So once you're done with defining all of this information, the next step would be to launch your mass deployment toolkit again on this computer, and you would run the export topology command. And once you run the export topology command, you perform validations again to make sure it's a proper usable topology. And once you get that topology file, you would then copy that file over to the computer running configuration manager. And once you do get that file over to computer running configuration manager, you then run the import topology command on the configuration manager computer. And what that would do is, let me switch to the other computer. Give me 1 second. So we're back on the configuration manager computer. And let's take a look at what configuration manager would look like once we have imported a topology into configuration manager. So under device collections, this is the configuration manager console, and under assets and compliance, you would go to device collections, and under device collections, each time you import a topology using a unique identifier, it creates a new entry here. If you import a topology using an existing identifier, it would perform a delta compare to see what differences there exist between the old topology and the new topology, and it would only perform or only implement the differences between the two. So the incremental changes would be applied here instead of recreating the entire topology. So if we expand this topology, you'll see several other nodes here. The idea here being we wanted to define both a homogeneous as well as a heterogeneous target collection of computers onto which you could deploy retail components. So for instance, we have an entry here for real-time services. So what this entry will do is it will let you target all computers that need to have real-time services installed on them. And which computers, who decides which computers need to have real-time services installed on them? Again, all this information comes from the topology file, which in turn comes from the information that was defined in Microsoft Dynamics AX deployment forms. So in that sense, you are able to easily target computers by specific component types. So you're able to target computers that should have your async servers, your channel databases. You're able to target all of your clusters that you define separately. You're able to target specifically all of your point of sale terminals, your retail POS, and your modern POS. And aside from that, what you're also able to do is you're able to look at things from a business perspective. So, for instance, if your topology had multiple legal entities as part of it, you would see both of them here. And this is the heterogeneous view that I had referred to earlier. So if you click on one of these nodes, you'd see a heterogeneous view in that it would show you the topology components by virtue of how they correspond to individual stores. So if you click on store 1, you'd be able to target all components that are required for store 1 to function. And underneath that, you'd be able to see all the modern POS clients that need to be installed for store 1, all the retail POS clients that need to be installed for store 1. Likewise, all the real-time services and channel databases and retail servers and so forth that are required for store 1 to function. So by providing both a homogeneous as well as a heterogeneous view, you're able to have a much more granular as well as scalable means of addressing certain subsets of your computers for deployment. Now, if you've gotten to the point where you have imported your topology and you have then also run additional commands using the deployment toolkit to do things such as set the credentials and to set the log share location. That can both be done from the deployment toolkit, then you're mostly all ready to go. After that, you'd need to perform a few specific things in that you would need to move to your software library section here. And in the software library, you would open the operating systems node, and under that, you click on task sequences. Here, what you would see is all of the task sequences that you as a user can schedule or not schedule. So the one I had mentioned too much earlier in the talk was the retail role manager. So this would be a prerequisite for this entire feature to function, in that you must schedule this task sequence on a desired subset of computers. And what it'll do is it'll go on each of those computers and it'll essentially just set registry values to indicate the desired role that should be enabled on each of those computers. Then you'd have another task sequence for installing and configuring retail components. So this is a pretty generic task sequence, which gives you the benefit of not having to duplicate the information of saying what components should be installed on what computers. With something as generic as this thing, this task sequence goes to all of the computers that you have scheduled this task sequence for, and it reads the registry value for each of those computers and evaluates which retail computers should be installed, which retail components should be installed on those computers. And it installs and configures all the components. Other somewhat unique task sequences that we have that we didn't put within the install and configure retail components are the other ones here. So for instance, configure retail channel database. So the idea here being, given the nature of the retail channel database, we provided a means for you to independently schedule a deployment of just this task sequence. This is particularly useful in case of deploying software updates to the schema of a channel database. So in case you did have a software update and you did patch your retail channel database, this task sequence would then go on each of those computers, and it would then run the channel database utility, channel configuration utility, so as to update the schema of your channel database. Likewise, the idea of having the offline database configuration independent of the primary install and configure task sequence, the idea here was you may want to run this independently after you've actually sent over a majority of your data to the channel database, and after that you may want to configure your offline database separately. Then, in addition to that, we also have separate task sequences for uninstallation of retail components. So if you have this task sequence scheduled for your computers, what this will do is this will go to each computer, and this would read the registry values that have been set by the role manager task sequence. And if it so happens that a component, because of changes in your topology that you re-imported, suppose you decided that this async client no longer needs to be on this computer, that information would be marked in the registry keys for that computer by the role manager task sequence. So once that information is updated, and if your uninstallation of retail components task sequence has been scheduled, it will read that information and it would uninstall components which shouldn't be any longer on that computer. Likewise, we have a specific task sequence for uninstalling channel databases, because uninstalling a database is a somewhat more sensitive operation. And we want users to be very explicit when they wish to uninstall an actual channel database and not simply uninstall other components which may not have as much impact. Likewise, we have more operational task sequences here for collecting retail logs and so forth. One thing to keep in mind is you may, if you are familiar with Configuration Manager, or even if you're not, you may come across standard applications and packages in the Configuration Manager console. So all of these were also created by the initialization command. Now, we highly recommend that you do not directly deploy any of these applications or packages, and instead that you actually stick just to task sequences for installation and configuration of retail components. There are applications packages as well as global conditions that are created as part of the SCCM initialization step that I've mentioned earlier. But again, it is ideal that you do not modify these things in any way or even try to schedule these things directly in any way. So once you have identified your task sequences and once you've identified which sets of computers you want to run the task sequence on, you schedule a deployment, and you can define the recurrence schedule, the priority, and so on and so forth. And then things are taken care of by System Center Configuration Manager. Likewise, as I discussed about software updates and customizations, again, quite well documented in the scenario walkthrough steps there. You would obtain, in case of your software updates, you'd obtain your MSP. You would use the update generator toolkit. So the update generator toolkit is usually in a similar location as the mass deployment toolkit. And that would take your MSP file, and that would read it and get the metadata out of that file. And it would then use that metadata to generate a catalog file for you on your behalf. And then you take that catalog file and you'd publish it over to System Center Configuration Manager, and you'd see that software update show up under software updates list over here. And from here, then you could schedule a deployment for a software update, much in the same way that you schedule a deployment for a task sequence or an application or a package. And the last piece about the customization deployment, you'd install the retail SDK using AX-Setup, as I had explained before. And again, this is quite well documented. So you would launch the retail SDK, and you would, within the retail SDK, you would actually navigate to the customization deployment type project. In that project, you would make a few changes to the primary XML file. Those details are already mentioned in the walkthrough document. And you would add your customizations to the project. You'd build a project, and you would embed all the dependencies within an exe for the project to be built. So at the end of the build process, you'd get a single exe, which would be self-contained and contain all of the customizations and dependencies that you had. So once you get that exe, you would then go into System Center Updates Publisher, and you'd create a software catalog for that exe file. And then you would publish that software update to System Center Configuration Manager. You, of course, need to provide a few critical details, such as which base product is the customization aimed for. And this information that you require to determine this is also already added to the documentation. So you'd provide a unique product ID depending on what customization was aimed for. And you'd need to provide a detection mechanism to say, here's how I know this customization is already installed. So you'd provide those pieces of information, and then you'd again publish that customization as a software update. And you'll see those updates here, just like other updates. And from here, you could schedule a deployment, and your customization would be deployed to the correct components. So that was a very brief, high-level overview of System-Centered Configuration Manager and mass deployment for Retail R3. We look forward to your feedback in this feature area, and we'd love to hear any ideas, suggestions, any problems you may run into. And with that, I will be ending this webcast. Thanks for watching this webcast, and I look forward to your feedback. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.